Bam.
This is Tim Spalla, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
You just said, I'm winging it. So am I. And okay, look, one of the things that I say a lot, like when someone says something's hard or something's scary, I'm like, I've been in a head on collision with an army tank. So, our version of winging, and I'm sure you have a similar thing like, no shit, there I was, and then the rocket or whatever, right? But our version of winging it is quite different than what some other person might be doing it. Like when they're afraid because they're winging it, you're like, yeah, we're winging it, but whatever comes down the pipe, we're going to deal with.
Yeah. I can't remember anything I prepare anyway, so it's easier this way.
um, when you aren't in a combat setting, like, what's the scariest thing day in, day out? Like, is it having to brief the boss, or like, what are the things where you're like, man, there's a lot of pressure right now?
Yeah. The days of briefing the boss are kind of over for me.
Right.
I own my own therapy practice out here in Denver, Colorado. So
Sure.
today, these days, the scariest things that I got to deal with are usually just working with clients, really intimate spaces, as they push through their challenges and becoming aware of what's coming up for me in those moments and what I'm remembering about what I've gone through. I do a lot of work with veterans in a kind of a trauma recovery space, and work a lot with moral injury. And of course, a lot of that resonates with areas in me that, can come up in those moments. And yeah, and that's kind of as scary as it gets for me these days. You still there, Pete? Did I lose you? Well, if you're still watching, I'm now the host of the Break It Down show. Thanks for joining us today. Pete looks like he's frozen. We'll wait a couple moments for him to come back on. Hey, there he is.
Got invited back.
Yeah, there you go. I just took over your show.
So you were talking about the moral injury space, and I want to get into that. But when I was asking you the question originally, and I should have asked it more clearly, back then, back when you were, because look at all the places you've been, all the countries, all the wild situations you find yourself in. When you're on the post or not doing the wild parts of the job that you've done, like what were like the scary things, or like, man, this is like, look, your career can be in your hands at any point in time. I always said that. Out in the villages and everything, that for sure is dangerous, and there's a huge element of danger. But I got killed more in the staff room. The staff would absolutely ice me if I didn't manage their role within the unit. If I didn't manage my relationship with Sergeant Major had to be great, because if he didn't get why I was there, he would undermine me. Right? This is what I'm getting after. Is tank is scary, an enemy is scary, but your friends are just as scary sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's an even better question. I love that one. I will say, if I go back to my days of as a junior Ranger intel guy, I had quite a unique experience in that work as an intel guy. I got to do a lot of stuff outside the talk that was pretty interesting. And then, but when it comes to like the day-to-day job, the pouring through data, the watching surveillance feed, and coming up with a briefing to give the commander, I will say that was always a really tense experience for me, to have an entire platoon of Rangers come sit in the briefing room and try to paint the portrait of a target for them, and to answer their questions. It really makes you check yourself. What do you know? What are you confident about?
Yeah.
And the leadership that I had when I was in the Rangers, I mean, these guys are legends. I mean, there are some guys that were in those rooms that were legends at the time, and then went on to like truly deepen their place in the 75th Ranger Regiment as legends. And I served with some just really, really incredible leaders. So going in front of them, as a tabless, E4 Ranger was always intimidating for me. And I remember that being just about as scary as getting on a helicopter and flying out to a target.
Yeah, it's funny. 75th, right? That's like, that's the one you want to be in. And the next week I got Vinny Vargas on the show.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh,
so we got a couple of scroll guys coming out, it's good.
Vinny's a great dude, doing great things for the community. That's for sure.
He for sure is. And like you, that guy can't sit still for 5 minutes. He's always doing something.
Yeah, you can't help it. It's ADHD. It follows you through your life. You just learn to work
and he's got like 6 kids,
Yeah.
So the thing you're talking about, though, like being an E4 and having to come up with a good intelligence picture, and part of the commander's job is to develop you, because they're going to know, they're going to intuit more about what you're doing than what you can get. They can see a bigger picture. They talk to different people. And so even then, your intel picture is going to be evolved as you're saying it, because you don't know enough. Even as an E4 with 5 years in, you just can't know enough about your job to really have mastery, right? Mm-hmm. Especially compared to an 05. I mean, that's a world of difference. I mean, you're not even supposed to talk to the battalion commander. Like, why are you talking to me?
Oh, that's funny you say that. I had a really good relationship with our battalion commander. There were nights where he'd call me on the phone and we'd be talking about targets, and he'd ask my advice or ask me what I knew, and I always felt he put a lot of trust in my assessments. So it's funny you say that. That's one thing I do remember about that, about those years, is I do feel like I had the confidence in my leadership. I had a great experience. My first 2 deployments, when I was actually working in a TOC as an intel guy, because my last couple of deployments were spent working in detention facilities. So I got 2 actual deployments where I got to be a part of the magic, and I'll tell you, I'll never forget those experiences. And they have really shaped who I would go on to be as an intel guy in my career that followed. But I do remember I had just gotten a battalion maybe a month before my first deployment, and just had no idea what was going on. I didn't even know if I was an intel guy at that point. But I remember showing up, and I was attached to an infantry platoon, again, full of legends. And I can remember our first sergeant at the time. He did something I'll never forget. I'm kind of stumbling through this intel stuff, trying to figure out my computers and all the little things that intel guys do. And he basically said, man, if you're ever going to understand what this is, you're going to have to come with us. Like, you got to go out the door with us.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, I'm like, well, that wasn't in the AIT training that we got, right?
Yeah.
But it really, it helped me grow in a way as an intel guy that I realize now was really unique, especially even in the regiment. Not a lot of us guys got to go out on target and actually get to see that side of it. So to go from, developing target packages and watching, guys through surveillance and really developing like patterns of life from, a 50,000 foot perspective, to actually go out on target and interact with the people that I'd be watching for like weeks at a time. And I remember our first sergeant telling me, he's like, this is going to be a really important part of, what you do as an intel guy in this regiment. And you're going to see what we see out there, and it's going to help you be a better intel guy for it. And he was absolutely right. It totally just blasted me off, I feel like anyway, into a kind of a different realm of intelligence capabilities.
Yeah, that resonates with me because you need the right kind of mentors that will give you the right kind of access, the right kind of support, all those things. And it's great that you talk about your relationship with the commander. Until folks often fall in love with.
Pete's Wi-Fi is giving him trouble today. Well, I will fill this space for Pete while we wait for him to come back. Talk about winging it. So as I had mentioned, I spent my early career in the Rangers. I was an intel guy out at 2nd Ranger Battalion out of Fort Lewis, Washington. It was in that experience that I had just a lot of incredible exposure, both to what incredible leadership looks like, being able to benefit from the training and the ability to drop into an organization with a culture and a tradition that really push Rangers to their limit and put them in places to make a really significant impact. And I consider myself really fortunate to have been allowed in those spaces and to have been able to contribute to the success of our battalion and the regiment's mission during that time. My active duty. Hey, I was just walking your audience. I'm winging it. Just walking your audience through some of the experiences I had when I was in 2nd Ranger Battalion. So every time you drop out, I'm just going to pick up, and when you come back in,
good. Yeah. Apparently, I need a new wireless router or something mechanically is not working right. Which that's our world. That's our Wi-Fi world. I always talk about the TAC fax. You're like, we're going to send you a TAC fax, and I'm like, no, you're not. That thing never works. So. Having a relationship with the commander is essential for an intel guy, right? Like you can think that your products are great, but if the boss isn't coming to you and trying to improve their resolution, you aren't playing at the right level, And it's fine to have to be mentored and move up, but you need to be always moving up, and that's so critical. And that ground truth of what those guys need, what it's like to be them. It's easy to be cold and say the target is here in this house, and there's 15 yards. But they have to live that thing. They're hungry, they're tired, and to see that, to experience it. You're right, man. That's it's invaluable.
Yeah, and to think, they're going out there, or they were going out there with the information I was giving them, right? Yeah, right. They, I can spend weeks looking at a target, but Ranger gets 2 hours to make sense of it when he's out there. And whatever I provide for them is going to help paint that picture. And to have been able to be given those experiences where I can go out and experience what these guys are having to fight through and work through on their way to making sense of these targets and bringing back whatever, is useful in an intelligence sense, like it really helped refine my craft. And really helped me understand where I was weak as an intel guy, and some of the areas where I felt like I actually excelled and could provide some benefit to the teams.
When I would get to a new unit, because I never belonged to the units that I worked with, and a lot of times, even though I was with the Army or in the Army or wherever it was, they didn't know me, right? I hadn't gone to NTC with them. They have no idea about my work ethic. But when I would stop into the 2 shop, I'd be really nice. But you guys are more of a client for me as a collector on the field, right? And so I'd go see the 2, he's 23 years old or whatever, he's chewing, and I'm like, how good is the resolution on your intel picture, And if he said anything more than 50-50, I didn't take him seriously.
Yeah.
And then I would go look for like an NCO and be like, hey, help me out here. Because I had to figure out, it's not my job to talk to everybody. I will have dinner with everybody, but I need one point of contact, and I'm supposed to start with that officer. Yeah. And if I felt like they didn't know, and you know how this goes, I got to find the person who knows. and or the chief, if it's a chief in there, depending on how the makeup of that two shop is. But anything greater than 50-50, and I was like, all right, we got a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I feel fortunate. I mean, we did have, the most advanced counter-terrorism task force in the history of the world. So I feel like our fidelity was pretty high on most nights. I mean, when I was active duty, 2005 to 2009, I mean, that's the height of the insurgency in Iraq. I mean, the most sophisticated, terrorist networks that we had seen up until that point.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was a period there where the guys were going out 3 times a night. I mean, that's how much fidelity we had on these targets.
Yeah.
And always felt pretty good when they'd radio back in, jackpot.
That's
PC.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. It was always a really good feeling.
Yeah.
And I feel fortunate enough to be in a unit where we got more of those than we didn't. So it was always made the work seem like it was just that much more worth it.
As someone who sat on the other end of a bad jackpot, I'm like, oh no, what happened? Like, it's so easy to hate the intel guy, but again, you guys are doing the best you can with the information you have. And I've also sat in the analyst chair. I've worked on targeting packages, and what I'm supposed to do, and you don't get to pick, right? But what I'm supposed to do is be outside the camp and gathering, building sources, building networks, all that kind of stuff. And so when you see reports come in and you're like, oh no, this person is not prepared to do this job on a daily basis. Like the person who would be my counterpart, it's not my job to go help that person. It's not my job to go do their job, but it definitely informs how I inform my command, and like, hey, the fidelity of this information is compromised by the person collecting it. And I have to be honest about that and say, because and you know this, because when you read raw intelligence or raw reports when they come in and you see like, oh my gosh, this person didn't ask the right questions. They miss things like, where's this piece of information that's supposed to be right here? Yeah. And they don't have it. You go, oh no. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but you realize the team is the team. And if that collecting element isn't up to the path or up to the task, what do you have to do? You have to manage that, Yeah.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's you're describing the trajectory of my career. I can remember my first deployment. I believed everything I read there. Yeah. Every report that came through, it was like, oh my God, this is happening. This guy's doing this. And I can acknowledge I made a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of,
we all do. Yeah.
assessments I made that I regret, that resulted in things that I regret. But I do, I can say over time, I would learn from those lessons. And I became a hell of a lot more critical of what I was reading and seeing and watching by my second deployment. Yeah. Certainly. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like it's kind of a process we all got to go through. It's not like intel school, right? It's just not. And when you're rolling in, so many of us during that time, 2005, coming out of AIT, most of us were deployed within a month or two when we graduated AIT. So you think about it, like,
imagine
you're going from totally notional, no consequences, no real life consequences for anything, to all of a sudden it's lives on the line and
oh my God,
and blood on your hands kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about the complete lack of experience that you deploy with, right? And the system just relies on the system to correct that, but it requires a lot of errors. Yeah. And this brings us back to the moral injury part of this, where you're brought in to be smart. You're doing all this smart, sexy stuff. You're reading these reports, and of course you can put together what's happening, and you've got tools to help you do all that stuff. And you are the most confident guy in the world. You're in the gym and you're working out. You're like, I know what I'm doing. And then you get a little wiser, and you're like, I hadn't the first clue of what I was doing, right? Yeah. And in my case, I know personally, I've made calls that have got people killed. On the other outside of town, but I got them killed. If I would have been more accurate, maybe those people don't die. Maybe they die no matter what. But I caused people to go kill them, and you're just like, oh no, oh no, I've done this thing.
That's a heavy one. It's actually been one that I've struggled with for quite a while. Still days where I do. And a lot of those experiences, those kinds of experiences, what really has motivated me to get into the mental health field. We can get into the post-Iraq years and what that all looked like, but I will go back to just how fortunate I feel to have been raised, and brought up in the regiment. When we deployed, that first deployment, not only was I just a green tabless E4 that had no idea what he was getting into, but when we deployed, they would send the junior enlisted intel guys to outstations, and I ended up at an outstation alone. I didn't even remember the password to get in my computer. I had an incredible that he did a lot of coaching and mentoring for me during that deployment. But I mean, it was me and a platoon full of infantry guys.
Yeah.
And I think they taught me more about how to be an intel guy than I had learned at any point up until that time. And I didn't have much choice because you're watching these guys go out the door every night, and the sense of responsibility over what they're going to encounter, what they're going to have to do, and what they're going to be carrying back with them when they come back to the FOB was not lost on me. And they made it a point that it wouldn't be lost on me. I knew my responsibility to them. And you talk about on-the-job training. So, it's like the intel guy's working, 18 hours a day, mostly because he's scared to make a mistake.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll always go back to that. And everything I did as an intelligence specialist from that first deployment onward, anything I may have done that was good or helped in any way, I draw back to that experience in that platoon. I mean, they really allowed me in and helped me really understand what my responsibility was and what I was being asked to do.
Yeah. And like you said, and people don't understand, the 75th is not a gentle unit. It's alphas competing against alphas.
Yeah, you think?
I mean, the bar is, there's no getting around that.
Yeah.
And boy, and to be an E4 with no tab in that place, you basically don't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. So and I was a college E4, which was always kind of odd for me. I was in basic training as a 24-year-old, and I'm like doing combatives against 18-year-olds. It's like, this doesn't even seem fair, right?
Right.
I remember getting into regiment and thinking, coming in as a college educated, granted I was first generation college graduate, thought I had my head on my shoulders, thought I had it kind of figured out. And I just remember, the regiment will humble you. It really will. And in ways that aren't always easy. And I struggled with it for a while. Nothing compares to dropping in the front lean and rest for a 21-year-old tab D5. But looking back on it, realizing like there was a lot in there for me. I didn't see it as much at the time, but when it was my turn to go through Ranger School and get my tab and assume my position in the leadership structure, it totally started to make sense, right? It's the age doesn't matter. It's the culture and that same culture, that discipline, that order. I mean, that's what keeps guys alive in this chaos, right? And that's what it mostly is as a Ranger. When you are deployed, it is chaos, and there are a few tools you have at your disposal to stay alive, and one of them is discipline and good order. So I laugh about it because it was like, man, it really sucked doing push-ups for someone 4 years younger than me. But looking back on it now, I'm just like, yeah, it made sense. And I ended up going on to do the same thing to my privates when they were coming up through the 2-shot. So
I had a similar experience. So I go to college, I graduate, I'm 24, I go through basic, but I'm, in the intel world, as you know, there's plenty of smart people around, plenty of people with degrees.
Yeah.
But then you get to the Ranger Regiment, and you definitely are like, wow, why would you do that? Why would you come in and be an E4,
Yeah.
So there's that aspect. And then I didn't go to the Ranger Regiment. I went to a Intel battalion that had attached to it Echo Company 51st Infantry Regiment, who would never say that they were part of the 165th. They would only say they were part of Echo Company 51st Infantry Regiment,
Yeah.
even though they're within our thing, because they would never acknowledge the Intel part. And for the most part, those guys kept to themselves. Your NCOs had plenty of, trooping to do. But when we did have the occasion to interact, whether it was like, competitions and physical fitness or like, battalion runs and everything, they for sure wanted to put us in our place, except for there's some of us that were athletic enough and in shape enough that, we became the standard by which they measured their lower guys. So we did this battalion run one time, and I get the guide on, and they're like, go around the battalion formation. And I'm one of the right guys to pick. I can do all that. And I go around the head of the formation, and it's in Germany, so the road's kind of mossy and slippery. So I slip and I fall. I spike the guide on the ground, push off my hand, and the Echo guy passes me. And everybody just a huge roar because he passed me. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not having that. So I ran his ass down. And that guy, oh my God, they harassed him forever. Because not only did he get caught and passed again, but it was an Intel guy that did it. But man, the competition in those kind of units, for physical fitness, you could be the fastest guy in your state in the 2 miles or the mile. You will not be the fastest guy in that regiment, not even close, because there's men in that regiment, not kids. Yeah, it's amazing. And that bar that that's there, that you're trying to get over. When do you feel like you hit it? Like when you're like, I am disciplined, I'm orderly, I'm competent, and I can stand here as a member of this regiment, this honored unit. Most units don't have that much respect just in the name. When did you feel like you arrived?
Oosh. That's a interesting question to ask. It was kind of an interesting dynamic. So being an S2 guy in the regiment, things were a little different for us, right? The bar was a little different.
Yeah.
You walk out in the quad and it's, basically a bunch of D1 athletes out there doing their thing and pushing themselves in ways that, I know was unique to the regiment. As an Intel guy, being a smart ranger, the criteria was a little bit different in terms of what we were expected to do, right? Like, the goal is that we can perform at the same level physically as everyone else. But when it comes to like actually keeping a mind that's open enough to be able to bring as much information in and assess and like to create a picture. I always thought about this just as an Intel guy, even in the Army, there is a way, there's training that's going to hone you in on your skill set. And, in the infantry world, it's going to be different than all the other MOSs, right? But for Intel guys, especially in the regiment, we had to pass all the same physical requirements. If you wanted to be an NCO, you had to go to Ranger School. There's no way around it. But then there was also you're also going to have to read 50 books worth of information every 2 weeks and be able to stand up in front of, people who would, in my case, eventually go on to be generals in Special Operations Command and brief them with confidence.
Yeah.
And realizing how unique that was and the criteria that we were graded on. I mean, that there's nothing more terrifying than going up and briefing a guy like now General Carilla. At the time, he was a battalion commander when I was working with him, and I'll tell you, like, all the running, all the climbing, all the everything we had to do physically, nothing compared to having to stand up in front of him and tell him what you know, and then just wait. Because of course he knows 1,000 times more than you do. But for me, I guess when it felt for me like I finally arrived at And I will say I struggled with it for a lot of years. And even after I left the regiment, I didn't ever really know if I had arrived. But the good thing in regiment, and it can be painful for guys that can't make it through. But if you want to be an NCO, if you want to be a leader, you got to go to Ranger School. There's just no choice. If you want to lead soldiers, it doesn't matter if you're on the line or if you're in the 2 shop or 3 shop, it ain't going to matter. And so we had in battalion kind of an organic rite of passage where you had no choice. And when you went, you had to pass or you weren't going to stick around very long. And I realize Pete's frozen, but I'll keep talking until he comes back on.
No, I'm here. I'm back.
Oh, you're here. You're here. Yeah, you froze up a little bit again. But for me, I think it was, and there's some, I mean, it was a process for me just to even get to Ranger School, which is a story for another time. But I think when I pinned my tab on, I was lucky enough. My oldest brother was a Ranger, and he was at my graduation, was able to pin my tab on for me. But I can remember how that felt, and I can remember, walking, back into battalion with that tab, and how much that meant to me. I mean, there are still few things in my life in terms of accomplishments that even compare to being able to walk around with that tab on my shoulder. It just, it's the most connective thing to the tradition that we have in the regiment, but it's just that it's almost like that billboard you get to wear around, like, yeah, I made it through, I did it. And I'm out the other side. And it was after that, after graduating Ranger School, when I started to get more leadership positions within the S2, started to take on junior soldiers and their training and mentorship, and started to take on a lot more responsibility that as an E5 in a 2 shop full of privates, I mean, that meant a lot to me. It really did feel like that's probably the moment when I arrived.
Yeah, that's a great answer, man. And you're talking about like the size and the importance of I mean, that particular unit. I don't know if there's another unit that holds that. I've worked in the 3rd of the 82nd, and underneath those are the different PIRs, and they're comparable, but I don't think they have the name recognition of the Ranger Regiment, and it's just such a big thing. Just to illustrate for the audience, because maybe they won't understand, being a Ranger it's a leadership school that you go through. My little team that I was on, our boss was a very mild-mannered, small little guy, and just like a school teacher is what he was, right? But we deployed, and we just didn't have respect, and he wasn't a commanding presence just sitting in the room. As you might imagine, the 82nd, it's like, we don't even wear, jackets, right? We're too hard for jackets.
Yeah.
And here's a guy that would wear a jacket if he got cold. But then it got out one day, like, oh, hey, Bruce, you've got a Ranger tab. And he's like, yeah, I got a Ranger tab. Yeah. Just happy, smiling. You're like, when'd you go to Ranger School? Turns out he's the senior Ranger in this brigade.
Wow. And,
that flipped it around. And so when Bruce sat there as a colonel, as the senior Ranger in the 82nd Airborne, 3rd Brigade, all of a sudden when he spoke, people paid attention, and then they whisper, because they had that much respect for that tab and his being first in that unit. And I am telling you, I know you get this. It made a difference in how we were seen and respected and paid attention to. And as an outside intel element being attached, that's money for us. It's so important.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that it's one thing to have a tab in battalion. It's another thing to go on TDY to like intel schools or, go work with other units and be an intel guy with a Ranger tab. I mean, it just, you feel like you're 10 feet tall, and it was like instant respect, and acknowledgement of that rite of passage you went. But then everybody just believes you're an awesome intel guy, which may or may not ever be the case. But I just, it totally had changed how I looked at myself, because I saw how differently other people started looking at me, and And just it was good.
Let's get back to with that. That unit again. It's so storied. We all know the standard, or we're familiar that the standard is super high. But now, when you sit with somebody, there's a couple of things I want to ask you about. When you sit with somebody, try to get them, get them through the problems in their head. Like one of the things that for sure happens, and you've alluded to this, working 16 or 20-hour days. I often joke and be like, "Oh no, we worked 36-hour days indefinitely."
Yeah.
And then because I was a federal employee, right? I'm a Department of Army civilian at this point. And they're like, report your time. And I'm like, this week was 110 hours this week. I'm like, that's not possible. And I'm like, you're not working for the 82nd, And so I'm a firm believer that as much as jumping off a 5-ton and snapping your tib fib, and being, permanently broken in some measure, extended work hours like that, it's required, but it's also just as damaging as carrying an 80-pound rut for the entire time. It just
You went mute again, Pete. I missed that last part.
Everything's going crazy today. That level of work, that workload, it bores holes in your soul, your brain, your mind, and you think you're operating normally because there's no open wound to look at.
You're muted again.
I know. They're shutting off on me. Anyhow, talk a little
charge
bit
them up
while I
before
work
the
on
podcast.
No, they're totally charged. It's
Okay.
it's toggling on and off. I don't know what's going on here. But talk a little bit about what that damage looks like, because it's not just, like I said, it's not the physical damage. It's also the mental and the psychological damage that we run across. And you have these credentials just by serving in the 75th that we all can respect that you are 10 feet tall. You're like, I'm 10 feet tall. I get everything you're talking about. And it really means something.
Yeah. I mean, drawing on the experiences, as a guy in the regiment, I mean, that's like one bucket. I think I mentioned when we were talking previous to this, I went from regiment transitioned over as a private military contractor over to SOCOM, did a bunch of deployments throughout East Africa and elsewhere. And, living in an AFO type environment and working in that space, same thing, extended hours, a lot more freedom. But, and then moving from that into the wildlife stuff for 7 or 8 years after that, I feel like I've probably spent more hours of my life working than I have spent doing anything else. And as hard as it has been to let go of that, it became such a part of my identity. Well, if I'm not working 20 hours a day, trying to chase down bad guys, then what good am I doing? Yeah. And, take this bucket of experiences from Iraq and everything that came with it. And you talk about trauma and moral injury and some of those things, like, how do I ever make up for that or make sense of any of that if I don't keep doing it and don't keep trying to get it right? I mean, the injuries and the trauma typically come from the mistakes. And I certainly made my fair share of mistakes throughout my career in the Rangers and afterwards. And then you just latch on to the identity. Well, if I don't keep working, then it was for nothing. Or maybe, I am the screw up that did that. If I can't find a way to crawl back from it. And for so many of us, it's just bury yourself in the work and all the second and third order effects of taking that approach to life and to work, especially when you've got family and kids and other people who want some of your time. What I see a lot now working with veterans, especially the guys from the soft community, it's so hard to let go of that identity. And so much of that identity is wrapped in work. And it's how we avoid sitting back and actually feeling the things that want to be felt, or thinking the things that want to be thought, or even just evaluating what is our belief system, what is that framework that's in there. Am I still a military? I had a great quote that was said that I heard the other day from a really, really close friend, and he was talking about being at a friend's retirement ceremony who was retiring from the Air Force, and he had mentioned in the guy's speech, he had said, I don't know where the Air Force ends and I begin.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me, because it's like, yeah, that's why we still, we still spend 20 hours, a day doing everything we do, because it's really hard to come out of that and not completely lose your identity. Or I would say just as critical, it's hard to come out of that and drop the shield and feel what it was, feel the places you were in. I mean, working in the regiment, you had like 19, 20-year-old kids going out on 3 missions a night doing what Rangers do. And I think about that all the time, and I see it working with clients now. Like, how do you ever let that go? In such a formidable time of your life, to let that identity go and then try to make sense of whatever it is that's there when you let it go. It seems, at least for me, it seems where the challenges really start to come up. The issues with who am I, what's my identity, what's my purpose, what's my role, and how do I make sense of everything I did and everything that happened around me. So I do a lot of work in that space.
Yeah. It's a big space. I've battled my own, and I say this openly because I think it's important to have people here. Basically, every day I have a bout of suicidal ideation. It's not actionable today, but it's manageable for me. And part of that management is learning that some things move at their own pace. Not every problem has to be overwhelmed through work, and by sitting with those demons, by sitting with your mistakes, by accepting them and kind of, slowing down long enough to reckon with it. That is a form of being in the gym. That is a form of self-development. Yes. And if you don't do it, that rooster is going to come and crow at some point, and you're going to get woken up. You just, you hopefully, like I talk about, like, just like leaking down my stress balloon, and I can put the accelerator down and I can go work hard and I can work as hard as anybody else, but I know that it's not good for me to do. And so I do it in spurts, and then I say, I need a break. And if anybody's got a problem, we can get into why I need a break, and I don't have to answer to a first sergeant anymore. I'm a hard enough boss on myself, right? Because of what we're talking about. But that ability to be able to sit down and let the demons come at you at night, because they always will, and then go, yeah, those are the demons. They'll be gone soon, and then I'll go on to the next thing. It takes an enormous amount of work. And I get why our brothers and sisters who've gone before us and not made it through the battle and taken on, I get why they get there, because it can be really, you can feel alone, and no matter you're in a room full of crowded love all around you, and you still feel like there's nobody here, I've got nothing, and there's only one conclusion to this story, right? Yeah. And it takes a lot of work. So I appreciate you for doing that. But let's talk a little bit about what that work looks like, because again, you don't get to see the physical injuries on you, but you do feel them. Especially when you drink a little bit, or you don't deal with it.
Well, first off, I feel it's important to acknowledge appreciate your vulnerability.
Yeah,
it's a big thing to be able to speak about those kinds of challenges on a public platform.
Yeah,
I have found the more guys talk about it on these platforms, the more folks will hear things that resonate, that they need.
Right.
But the biggest obstacle is, can I be vulnerable enough to admit it and talk about it? And it's like, once you get over that hump, it's kind of like, a couple more guys will follow you, and it just keeps coming. And I'm at a place in my own journey where I'm starting to do that a lot more. I work a lot in this space, but I'll tell you, it's been a hell of a road to get here for me. And, I talk a lot about how formative my experiences were in the regiment, and how lucky and grateful I am to have been allowed to serve in such an incredible unit. But, it doesn't quite tell the story of everything that came after. I mean, when I left regiment in 2009, I mean, it was a decade of darkness for me.
Yeah.
Trying to come to grips with this exact stuff that we're talking about. I went on, spent a couple years working with Special Operations Command as an intel guy, and then did some work with South Africa for quite a few years, and then 2015 started my own company and started doing wildlife poaching stuff. And when I was doing it, I mean, what calls a guy to, go deploy 30 times, in the middle of nowhere, Africa? I had a wife, had a newborn baby in 2015. In May of 2015, my firstborn came into the world, and a month and a half later, I was back in Africa.
Of course you were.
Just kicking myself. I mean, I'd cry myself to sleep thinking, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Like, why am I not home with my family and my little beautiful baby boy that just literally came in the world? The first thing he did was grab my pinky and he didn't let go.
Yeah.
Why am I here? Why am I back here? And I've spent a lot of years trying to answer that question. And for me, a lot of what I did after, my time on active duty, a lot of those years were spent buried under guilt and shame for the mistakes that I made. I talk about having just incredible leadership that mentored me and helped me, build skills in areas that I was weak. But like, when you're talking about regimental intel guys, skills that are weak are dead bodies.
Yeah.
These are humans that are no longer here because I screwed up something, or I didn't know how to do this, but we did it anyway, kind of thing. And to carry that around and then go out in the world afterwards and try to do whatever I can to try to make up for it, even to the extent that, it would destroy my marriage or destroy, any sense I ever thought I'd have of being a good dad or being around for my kids. It was a lot of years of darkness for me, buried, under all the things we bury ourselves under: depression, alcohol, you name it. The list goes on and on and on. And I didn't truly come out of that. I mean, I'm still every day trying to come out of it. And part of the work that I do now is me trying to come out of it. Like, I'm trying to make sense of what that lost decade was by trying to help others not lose a decade of their life, right? Like, it's like I'm one part counselor and can do all the clinical counseling things you need to check all the boxes. But more so than that, I'm just the guy who's been through it. I can empathize from a place of deeply felt experience of what it's like to wake up every day wishing you hadn't. And that 3:00 in the morning wake up call where you get to be reminded of everything you messed up in your life and everything that's wrong with you and everything you'll never get back because you're screwed this up and screwed that up. And then, oh yeah, once you've gone through all that processing, the next, hour and a half is going to be everything you're afraid of happening. And you are just can't get away from the past, and there's no will or desire to go in the future. And you're stuck in that middle ground, and there's no escape because it's either a memory or an expectation. And so many of us walk around in that space. And it's killing us. It's killing folks in our community. And to be someone who is trying to come out of it and bring some lessons learned and some toolkits to help guys so they don't get caught in that same place that so many of us do. It's a calling I didn't know I would ever have. But it's probably the first time in my life where I feel like I'm doing something I was truly meant to do. And it puts into context everything that happened up until this point. And if there's anything that does help me get back to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's knowing that at least I'm trying to do something about it to help others.
Well, you said a lot there, man.
Yeah.
Keep my microphone on. I'll say some things too. That weight and that work, every year we do this charity ride right across the nation for Save the Brave and raise a bunch of money up. And I'll ask the fellow veterans that we collect along the way, are we any better at this thing, battling this suicide thing? And basically we come to the conclusion that, we're not, but this is what we do. We'll continue to do it. What else can you do? You have to try to get better at it, but then you get that call in the middle of the night and someone has chosen today, and you can't get too invested in it because it's really hard on the soul, but you also have to care enough to care enough. Yeah. And so you got to grab folks, and like some of the things that I talk about, like you can't wait. You can't tell a person to wait to the end of the rope, then to reach out and call you, because they're hanging on with both hands. They don't have a hand for you to call. You have to call them. You have to get in front of it as far as you can, and just hopefully arrest the descent. And you can't always do that even. So that's just sort of how I see it. But how do you see it? Do you feel like you've gotten any better at this? Can you reliably rescue someone who's sliding down the slope? Or I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I don't know if it's possible to rescue someone, and I'll just speak right from the heart on this one. I don't know if it's possible to rescue someone. Like when you're in the spiral, physically you can stop someone from hurting themselves. There's plenty of ways to do that.
Yeah.
But in terms of making someone get to the place where they actually want to continue on living, that can only come from in here. I think, the best that I can do as a therapist, fellow veteran, somebody who understands the struggle is, and I know this is like such a loaded phrase anymore, but is just provide a safe space and do exactly what you just did about 15 minutes ago. Be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I find the quickest way to help someone feel safe enough to be vulnerable is to be vulnerable first.
Yeah.
Break yourself open. Let them see what it feels like to have someone admit what they're struggling with and what it's doing to them. And then let them feel that connection that comes with vulnerability. Because those are the two things I think save people. The safety and vulnerability, and the connection that comes when you are at your most vulnerable, because that is also a point when you are your most authentic. And that's the hardest thing for so many of us to be when we are struggling with this rucksack full of just garbage we've picked up along the way, is how do we be authentic? And for so many of us in the veteran community, being authentic means also acknowledging that this hurts. This actually hurts to feel these things.
Yeah.
And having somewhere to go and tell someone that. And so I think that's where I feel that my place is. And then just leading by example. I don't know if we have time for the shameless plug, but I co-founded a nonprofit last year. It's a veteran-led, veteran-focused mental health nonprofit called the Wounded Healer Project. I'm fortunate enough in that work to be partnered with an incredible individual. She's an Air Force veteran, mental health counselor, and I'll tell you, if there's anybody who saved my life, it's her, and continues to save my life as I just battled through a huge period of destruction this past summer. Had it not been for the tether and her ability to provide a safe space for me to deconstruct and crumble into all my vulnerability, I'm not even sure I'd be here right now. And And together we are we're trying to go back and get the others. We're trying to find the veterans that are struggling alone in isolation. I've spent over a year and a half working with Colorado Department of Corrections as a counselor. And in that work, I got to work with justice-involved veterans. So many of these guys deployed at the same time, same places as me. Like, we even knew some of the same things that had taken place. And it's like, oh gosh, I think we may have had something to do with that shit. And she's worked a lot with veterans and their families and and in that same kind of space. And kind of the where we came together was, well, where can we show up and reach these guys that might otherwise have every reason to close off and go deeper into their own isolation. And just as the universe would have it, we got invited to come and and meet a veterans drug and alcohol treatment court team here in Denver. That was last year. And to be in that system, to be working with veterans who are getting another chance, due to, may have made whatever life, mistake they may have made, but they're getting another chance, and realizing so many of them don't take that chance. They squander it. I had a lot of guys in the Department of Corrections. I was like, hey, where were you before you came here? Well, I was in a diversion program, but I decided to drink alcohol or get stoned or do whatever, and they kicked me out. And so we really have focused in on that. These veterans that are struggling with PTSD, moral injury, addictions, that find themselves in the justice system. A lot of them don't even have VA benefits, so no one is coming for them. And maybe the best they could hope for in that case is to get into a civilian, community agency full of therapists. But even if they're that lucky, they may have to wait 30 or 60 days. And you can imagine these guys are showing up to court, some of them on their first day in jumpsuits, just got, yanked out of their car a week earlier, drinking and driving, and got a family, had a job, had all these things. Like, these guys that have every reason to just give up. And our belief was that if we could go in there as veterans first and counselors second, offer them space, that we could help kind of walk them through this program, walk them through these challenges, help reframe some of the things that they've experienced in their life and the beliefs around it that they've picked up. And just teach them how to be vulnerable and teach them how powerful human connection can be, especially when it's another veteran who's coming back to get you. And it's kind of like that leave no man behind kind of thing. That's kind of our mission. And I really think, I mentioned it earlier, I really do feel like it's the thing I was always meant to do. And I had to do all the things before this thing to be at a place where I could do this thing and actually show up authentically. And I'm really grateful to be able to do that work. And to have all the support that we have in it. So, yeah.
Yeah. This is so many things in that. And, take on these challenges, some of them are rescuing the world, just wild animals, whatever, all these different things that we do. But sometimes it's hard to save ourselves. Like, I'll go to the gym every day and push and try to get up to bench pressing 315. But can you slow down and go to therapy? Therapy doesn't work for me. Well, have you tried another therapist? Did you know how to run a 5-minute mile when you first started running? Or do you have to work at this thing? It's supposed to be damn hard, Yeah. It's supposed to be scary and terrifying.
Yeah.
And
that's
things. I lost my brother 2 years ago. He's a veteran. Lost him 2 years ago. And we just could not get him off the train. And one of the things that I was telling him, I was vulnerable. And he looked at me like, I had no idea, and I'm like, well, I hadn't told anybody because I just hadn't figured out how to tell him. But I couldn't get him to calm down and slow down. This is during the pandemic. And I'm like, has there ever been a time that you can just work on you? That's it right now. Like, you don't have to worry about your house because no one's going to take that from you. Your family needs you around. We just couldn't do it. He had all the advantages, we got him to the VA. He had the dog, he had the pills and all that stuff. But, you just run out of time, and that you're trying to figure out, like, what did we miss? What did we not do? Whatever. And sometimes it's just the disease gets you, and it's like I tried to tell his daughters, and I don't know if it resonates with them or not, but it's as if he had stage 4 cancer, and it was, 50-50 if we were going to get him. And we didn't, and it wasn't for lack of trying. It wasn't for lack of love. It wasn't just, he was too sick, and it was, he was too far gone. I would call him every night. I didn't want to bug him, so I didn't want to overcall him, because you don't want to treat him differently. And so, but when we would chat, and it would be frequent, but not as frequently as I might have maybe wanted to. I would say, "Hey, how you doing?" And he would say to me, "Terrible."
Yeah.
And what do you do with that? Like, there's no quick answer for that. You're just like, oh my God. He could tell me. He was honest with me. He could tell me, "Oh."
Hey, Pete, you're muted again.
He could tell me he's doing great and lie to me, and 10 minutes later still be doing terrible. Or he could tell me he's doing terrible and be honest, and you just left with the reality of, this is a deeply sick person, and it's hard to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it is really difficult, and I sit in those spaces quite a bit these days, and sometimes I think all you can really do is just get down in the hole with them and feel terrible with them. And sometimes that's just what they need, especially when you're walking around. Yeah. Like you said, you'd be a room full of people and feel completely alone. Well, that's kind of what that is, right? Well, how do you help a guy who's struggling to that depth not feel completely alone? You get down there and you feel that terrible with him. Take it off his shoulders for a little bit, and sometimes that doesn't even require words. It's just presence. Sometimes the best you can do. We are all on this journey, and I really do believe, and should mention I work a lot with plant medicines and psychedelics, so I have really developed a framework around this, and a belief that we all come into this world and we knew what we were coming in for, and we knew how we were going to go out. Now, all of us, it's just trusting, right? Because at the end of the day, when someone takes their lives, especially, as tragically as the rate of suicide is in the veteran community, it's what's left behind that then matters the most. What do we do with this? Yeah. How does this person losing their battle resonate with me? What is it asking me to do? What can I do next time to make sure this doesn't happen? It's like every time a veteran pulls that trigger or goes to that length, we got to ask ourselves, all right, now we're here. What can we do?
Right.
What can we do so that another one doesn't get here? I think and I work with some really great organizations that I would love to plug. The Moral Compass Foundation or Moral Compass Federation is an organization that we actually just partnered with through the Wounded Healer Project, and they are doing incredible things, building a really incredible movement around just acknowledging moral injury and the role of moral injury in the suicide epidemic in the veteran community. They've got organizations in the Federation that are doing peer support, guys that are working with plant medicines. They've got folks like us that are working in the veterans treatment courts. There's a bunch of different, therapeutic type organizations that are set up to serve veterans. And I just think it's like more of that, right? And then we get on our monthly calls. It's like every one of us is a veteran with moral injury of some kind. And to see like everybody come together and be like, all right, let's do something about it. We've got some really good leadership that is really building a strong foundation for this effort. I know there's quite a few other organizations out there with a similar mandate that are trying to have the same kind of impact. But ultimately, it's what it's gonna take every single time. Every time we lose someone, it's an opportunity to sit back and say, well, what could we have done differently, and what do we need to do now? Because it does suck. It sucks, but you can't undo it. There's no bringing that person back, but there is something to do about it, so it doesn't keep happening again. And I think what we're doing, like this conversation, even just demonstrating what vulnerability looks like and the connection that you and I are developing, like I feel like I could cry right now, right? And it's just demonstrating that, creating places where veterans can go and feel safe enough to be vulnerable, and then enjoy and thrive through the connection that comes with vulnerability. And I think that's what we got to do.
When I look back at my brother's decline, I'm going through my own battle day to day, right? Like we talked about earlier. And my therapist and I, she's like, the first thing we're going to do, now I'm about to cry, right? We had to do was, she's like, I got to make sure I take care of you, and so that you can withstand this. And she was the one that said, he's probably not going to make it. You need to be ready. And if he does make it, he's going to be deeply sick for a long time. Yeah. And so it's not going to be a light burden. And before I lose the both of you, protect you. And so she did. We worked on that, and I got my tools to be able to manage. And, I have some regrets on how I checked in with his demise ultimately. But I wish I could have done more. I wasn't able to. And that was partly to protect me.
Yeah. Oh, I totally understand. And to carry that, it's a pretty heavy weight. And this would be probably a good time to remind you and your audience that self-care is not a selfish act. It's how we stay above the waves in this crazy, turbulent storm of life, and taking care of yourself and forgiving yourself.
Yeah.
Those are two things that are not disconnected.
They're not disconnected. Well, listen, and that's enough doom and gloom. Give me one good thing to close on here, because we covered a lot of powerful ground. But tell us a no shit there I was story or something fun.
Something fun. Let's see. What is a no shit there I was story? Well, yesterday I was a no shit there I was story. I should actually back up. 2 months ago, I had my first ever experience with a traditional Native American sweat lodge. And I had no idea what I was getting into, no idea what even this thing was. I kind of had an idea just based on a Google search. But 2 months ago, I walked into that thing, a total buffoon, having no idea what was waiting for me. Luckily, I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment. So when I got in there and they closed that door and then basically cooked me for the next 2 hours, and felt just the absolute power of that experience. As I mentioned earlier, I do work quite a bit with plant medicines and psychedelics for mental health. But nothing compares to what happened in that lodge that night for me. It was a form of healing I had never anticipated or experienced before. And it was being facilitated by a really well-known Lakota medicine man. And his lineage is just insane. It'd take me a whole nother podcast to walk through everything. But it was so profound and so connective and so releasing that I made it a point that night that I'm going to find a way to bring more veterans into this kind of healing experience. And it's been 2 months, a lot of trial and error, even had a weather delay. But yesterday I actually pulled it off.
Nice.
And I brought 10 veterans and veteran spouses into my first ever sweat lodge. And it was incredible. It was
Yeah.
beyond words incredible. The amount of healing and the pain and suffering was pretty big, but the healing was just profound. And it really has steeled my resolve. Like I'm going to continue trying to find ways to hold these and bring these Lakota healers back out to Denver to help us. But I must say the absolute best part of the entire thing was getting to share it with my two little boys.
Yeah.
My little 6 and 8 year old boys watching daddy take these veterans into that sweat and getting them back out and showing them what this looks like. Because God knows they have seen the worst in me.
Yeah.
And they've had to live through, you never really leave the war. And it'll find you at the most random places and times. And unfortunately, my boys have had to live through that. And for them to watch daddy go in there and kiss them, blow a kiss goodbye, and to see the looks on their faces and then come out, 2 hours later, just feeling like you'd just given away all this stuff, right? And to be able to hold them, I don't know if anything compares to that. And I just really grateful that literally just happened yesterday, and I get to tell that story on your show, because I wish there was a way I could give that experience to every veteran and their family. And my goal is to try to figure out how I can for as many as possible until the day I'm not walking anymore.
I love it. All right, stand by. I'm going to roll the credits on this, and then I'll come back to you.
Sure.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by your